Hello, everyone. It's his score, creative director of Project SWG Scorekeeper, with another Dev Diary entry. Today, I'm going to be talking about Endgames. I was thinking of the economy in SWG and some of the endgames around there, and eventually I had to break them apart into multiple sections. And so today I just wanted to talk about the endgame, especially as it pertains to these visions or ideas of these models of, well, how do you play the game. So firstly, we have to ask, well, like, how does someone play SWG? And having experienced many years now of Star Wars Galaxies gameplay, I feel like I was in a position to maybe explain that. So let me do my best. So for the early game, right, you're either a new or returning player. Maybe you did the tutorial station, you poor soul. Hopefully you didn't, but maybe you did. Back in the day it had some value, but it's probably crazy now. Or maybe you just jumped right in, right? You just clicked go. If this is old school SWG, you picked a planet, but more likely than not, you're going to find yourself right in Mos Eisley. In the NGE, that's where you start. And if you're lucky, you might stumble across another player, or maybe you won't. But more likely, you're just going to start doing the legacy quest line, or you're going to just start running missions. I once had a guilty veteran SWG player came back to an emulator and said, I have no idea what to do, so I'm just going to run missions. And he just did that for hours. And anyway, this is what it means to be a new player in SWG. You're either doing the legacy grind, or you're grinding in some way, or you're running missions. Now for the mid game, right? You might leave the new player area. Maybe you've left Mos Eisley and you've finally determined what profession you want to be. Maybe you want to be a rifleman, and so you're going to start leveling that. This is usually where that level grind begins, right? You say, okay, so this usually means I'm going to go to Dantooine Mining Outpost, maybe pick up an AoE attack and join a spin group, and I'm going to run missions and missions and missions and missions. It's going to be hours of buffing, spinning, missions, spinning, and you're going to level up your character. Admittedly, sometimes this can be fun. I've had some fun with some friends leveling up characters, but it can get really stale really quickly, especially if you've done it for thousands of hours. If you've played Star Wars Galaxies before, it can also be fun to experiment a little bit with skill choices and kind of respec a couple times. That's kind of a pastime, I would say, in Star Wars Galaxies, is determining you're going to be a rifleman, seeing someone use a pistol well, and say, I'm going to be a pistolier now, and I'm going to change things up. But for most of us, I'd say this part of the game is pretty exhausting now. Which brings us now finally to, well, the actual end game, right? So this is the good part, I think, the end game. In many ways, Star Wars Galaxies is kind of a limitless end game, right? It didn't start with a simple quest line that it ran us through, but it just threw us in the game and said, go have fun. Go create the game. Go create your destiny, right? And so I've had a lot of time to really kind of categorize these, but I think there's about 4 real end games that are happening in Star Wars Galaxies. And so first you have kind of your mercenary soldier type, treasure hunter collector type, your entrepreneur, and your citizen. And let me go into them now in a little more detail. Okay, so mercenary soldier type, which I should say, has an archetype. I think the NGE did this really well of giving us a picture of who to imagine this as. It executed poorly on what that should be, but I think the vision was good. And so, when we think of the archetype of the mercenary, I think we often think of Boba Fett or another bounty hunting scoundrel, right? Thinking of the soldier, I really think of the Stormtrooper experience. That's something that Star Wars Galaxies has that's pretty unique. There are very few games where you can legitimately play as a Stormtrooper. Really, Star Wars Galaxies is one of the true games where you can roleplay a Stormtrooper and you can have that experience. So that's the soldier archetype. Of course, there's the other side of this too. You could be the rebel soldier, the hero, and that's generally going to be lumped into kind of this overarching end game that I think is kind of the mercenary soldier. And it's a pretty challenging endgame. At this point, it's a pretty familiar path, though, to pretty much all of us. So, you finish your experience grind, and now the new grind is equipment, right? And maybe you need more credits to make that happen. So what do? You run more missions, possibly some more spin groups, right? Solo groups. Maybe you're a bounty hunter or or a smuggler, and you do those missions, which maybe allow for more credits. Maybe you go into space, right? Jump to light speed is usually full of credits, so maybe you just make a whole bunch of credits doing space missions or leveling up your space profession. You can also just look to the market and see, what's hot and try to farm that. So maybe, there's a certain hide on Endor that's really important to armor smiths, and they're buying it for lots of credits. So maybe you go hunt that. Or maybe you go to Restus and you grind the Restus missions and then you sell those. Or you find rare quest items that people want, or admittingly, a veteran reward. You just sell a veteran reward that, is a once in an account type thing that you'll never get again unless you buy on the market. So it's super expensive. So you just sell that in order to get kind of your buy-in to the standard equipment that you're going to need. So which leads us to that, right? So step 2, right? You're going to actually get that equipment. Maybe in some cases it's quest only. So like for the Ring of the Hero, you have to do the quest and go earn the ring. For heroic jewelry, you have to go do the heroics. That means you're going to run, the Tuscan King 5 to 20 times, or the Night Sister Queen mission heroic 5 to 20 times. You're going to do it a bunch, right? And you're going to farm it just so you can get that equipment that everybody has, so that you can, compete as a mercenary or soldier. So you're gonna, you'll finish outfitting yourself eventually with what'll likely be high-end armor, weapons, and then quest item buffs. And unfortunately, too, this usually means that it melds players and it kind of lumps them all together into similar play styles. I'm thinking of the Rifleman Combat Medic, or the Geo Pistol as the best pistol in the game because it cuts through most armors. So that's really what it looks like to move on up in your end game as a mercenary soldier. And then finally, really what that leads to, which is what it's all been building to, which is supposed to be the fun part, and I would say that arrives at competitive PvP. Right? So this looks a little bit different depending on where you go and your playstyle, but generally, right, Star Wars Galaxies has open world PvP. So maybe you're fighting in the streets of Theed, in a faction conflict, or maybe you're bounty hunting and you're going across the galaxy and you're going to attack someone and collect on a bounty, right? And so with top end gear, you're now competitive, and if you're lucky, you'll get some PvP. Newer players that you run into who are not geared like you, they're not going to have a good time, right? You're going to smoke them. Fighting with an experienced player, though, you might have some true competition. But unfortunately, I would say that the endgame of PvP in Star Wars Galaxies, at least post-NGE, kind of turns into a buff war. It's kind of an equipment war. Because the equipment scales so high, usually it's the person who's got the most buffs, the most equipment, that's going to win. Which isn't necessarily skill-based, it's just kind of wealth-based, right? So the wealthier player will typically win. But if you're lucky, you get into some even-ish scenarios where you can have some open-world PvP occur. Now, additionally, right, there is kind of the big metagame for the open world PvP. So you might fight over bases or planets or territories, which can be pretty fun. But likely the PvP crowd is going to be pretty small because, as it stands, as I listed it out, right, the cost of entry is enormous. So you're going to find yourself in kind of an elite, club of PvPers, at least as Star Wars Galaxies is in current form. Okay, so that's a big role, but there's another role in the end game, and that would be kind of this treasure hunter or collector type, I would say. And for me, there's a couple archetypes, but I think of Dr. Aphra as a good archetype for that. She's in kind of some of the newer canon, but she's an archaeologist, and she goes and she finds the rare artifacts and she steals them. So it's kind of like an Indiana Jones archetype, or in the Marvel universe, there's Star Lord, right? He's going into the place, he's grabbing the thing. So this is an interesting archetype for a couple of reasons. But one of them might be that it attracts kind of a different kind of player. I know that when my wife first joined Star Wars Galaxies, she was really into this idea of hunting down and treasure hunting, and so it appealed to her as a non-PvP player, right? These might be our PvE players. Here's another good archetype, right? So Rey, right? The scavenger. So it's a little less illustrious than going and getting that rare holocron from Mustafar, but there's also this component in Star Wars Galaxies where you collect all the items. It's all the junk. The junk dealer and the junk system is a huge endgame in Star Wars Galaxies. In fact, it's tied to the soldier and the mercenary because they have to get these junk items and trade them in for better equipment and stat modifiers and all that jazz, right? So, the person who's going around collecting all the junk, you can carve out a feasible life in Star Wars Galaxies just simply treasure hunting and collecting things and exploring and going around the galaxy. So, okay, so it's similar to other games, right? I mean, this is where there's a lot of similarities to your modern questing games, right? You find the rare junk loot item, the rare decorations, you go find the things. So it's very typical quests. This is found within the Legacy quest, Kashyyyk, Mustafar. The expansion planet's really gotten this idea of questing and treasuring. And so, but for many of us, this will be a retread. A lot of Star Wars Galaxies players have played through the Legacy quest multiple times. They've played through Kashyyyk, they've played through Mustafar, and so doing it again is not necessarily that appealing, and so it's kind of a chore, right? You go, I gotta go do the Mustafar quest, not because it's super fun or anything, or new and no one's explored it, but because I need to go get that holocron and I want that really good buff, right? I want that thing. But moving on to harder and more atypical quests, they'll kind of expand beyond that, and that's where you get into collections or some of the oddball quests with rare items that are out in the world, like old pre-CU quests that people didn't even remember. Maybe you'll farm holocrons or space-saving technique collections. If you're a creature handler, a big part of this is, I like to call it filling out your Pokedex, which is really, you're learning about all the creatures and their skills and abilities and types. The whole creature handler minigame, metagame is really interesting to go around and seek these places. And so, this is a definite fun end game, but it definitely has its limits. Okay. The third type of end game I would say is the entrepreneur, and I had a lot more on this section on the economy, but I decided it would be wise to probably just have a different feature to discuss the economy in Star Wars Galaxies because it's so huge and massive and it's complex. But in terms of the role, right, we can discuss that. And so we all know the entrepreneur role. We know what they're about. They're about making those credits. And, for inspiration, well, Star Wars Galaxies had it right the first time. I think of Lando Calrissian owning, the Bespin mining facility and, trading and gambling, and, he's all about those credits. And so I think, he was a good choice to kind of be the poster image for what it means to be a trader or a crafter in Star Wars Galaxies. And then, I think also of Owen Lars. That's what I think of when I think of what I want to do in Star Wars Galaxies. There's a part of me that just wants to go down and plant down a moisture farm and, just enjoy my cup of calf and watch the twin suns set. I think that's kind of the promise of a simple life in Star Wars Galaxies, and there is kind of a simple life end game if you want it. So those kind of the two extremes of the trader, the simple trader and the illustrious trader. So I also think what makes it kind of a niche in Star Wars Galaxies is that it's open to both factions. So there's an open galaxy where you have rebels and Imperials interacting and competing with each other in the same economy, and that's really interesting. So, okay, what's that look like? So it's pretty simple. It's kind of three main components that I found. So you start, basic crafting and trade. I mean, this is one of the beauties of Star Wars Galaxies, right? So you just load in, you jump in, and you start harvesting from the ground and crafting with your tool. Maybe you sell in the local bazaar, or maybe you build up and you get a vendor and you start selling your goods there. But it's that simple life, right? It's that Owen Lars simple life that you want to have, and it's a fun mini game, to craft up all the way and master architecture and have all these goods that you can then create with your resources. It's fun. It's really cool. It's a very simple crafting game now when you think about what kind of came after it in the greater game market. But it's a simple, tried and true. It's a good system. But what's next, right? So what's next is kind of the quality grind. So this means you're probably going to partner with treasure hunters, soldiers, mercenaries, whatever, and you're going to get your hands on some upgraded tools and equipment that maybe was quest related. Maybe you're going to grind treasure maps to try to get some crafting tools from there, some crafting equipment, or maybe you just need credits, right? And so you're grinding credits so you can buy better equipment or better tools, a crafting creature handler monkey, crafting wrist pad, all those things that give bonuses to your crafting. You're just upgrading your capital. And then thirdly, it's really the true final stage and the final end game of entrepreneurship in the game it's the quantity grind, and you scale up. You increase your sales volume, you compete with your competitors, and you earn credits to your heart's content. You probably want to get your hands on rare items such as the resource kits or other veteran rewards. Maybe you buy up all those veteran rewards to really kind of solidify and maximize your wealth. Really, essentially, you're an established crafter, and you leverage your built-up resources to monopolize and swallow as much business on the server as you can, or at least insofar as you wish, right? I mean, that's the final stage of what that looks like. But you don't have to do that too. You can be an Owen Lars, and you can just kind of hang back and do your crafting and hang out that way too. It's a decent end game to do as well. Okay, and so then finally, with kind of the fourth type of end game, I would say that is the citizen. And this last form is quite possibly the most important, as when all other end games dry up, when all that content is gone, this last form acts as the landing pad, because instead of being driven by NPCs or in-game items, this last form of endgame is driven by player creativity, and that's the secret sauce of Star Wars Galaxies. Let's talk entertainer first, I would say. And so entertainer, if I had to choose one thing that sets Star Wars Galaxies apart from all other games, I would say it's entertainer. This is a class that you play that encourages you specifically to focus on social play. It's attractive to many different kinds of players who perhaps may not want to jump into the PvP or the PvE treasure hunting. Maybe it's a non-combat focused play. And so in some ways, this is a class, this is a profession that lets you kind of jump straight into the end game, right? So you choose entertainer, you quickly level up. It's really easy, and you master your profession like almost immediately. And you can then just start providing value to other players just from the get-go. You provide buff to them in their journey, which is similar to like a non-combat doctor providing buffs, right? So you buff them before they go out. And you get to engage in the economy game a little bit too, because you get to earn credits while doing so, right? So you're in the service economy is basically what you're doing, is you're creating a whole service economy on the game. And you're active, right? So you're in/tells, and your profession is really tied and glued together with the social fabric of the game. Okay, and so because of this, I think it's the quintessential Star Wars Galaxies profession. I really do. I think it is a very unique and special profession that sets Star Wars Galaxies apart. Okay, but then it grows too, right? Because you're not just going to hang out in the cantina forever. You could, but I mean, that's just kind of where the social game starts in Star Wars Galaxies. It starts in the cantina, but it grows from there. So next comes cities, decorations, and I think it's perhaps the deepest part and maybe the best part of Star Wars Galaxies. right? I should say there's archetypes for this too. I think that well, Princess Leia is a great archetype, right? She was a citizen in the galaxy dealing with things like, at times, of course, she played the role of the soldier going into war, but at other times she was a good reference point for just someone living in the galaxy and dealing with the political ramifications of what's going on. And then, of course, right, and love this picture. You also have Padme and Bail Organa as good archetypes for, well, what does this exactly look like? Well, it looks kind of like intentional, engaged players attempting to shape the galaxy that they live in. Which, when you think about that in terms of Star Wars Galaxies, that's huge. That's huge. And so, okay, so what's that look like? So, it's fueled by everyone else. It's fueled by the treasure hunters and the entrepreneurs. They're the ones who are getting the items and making the credits, okay? And it's also for, in some ways, the mercenaries and the soldiers. It's what they're fighting for. And so, okay, so a citizen will construct a house or a city with their friends. We all know that, right? So, okay, we're going to make up this player's city. Structures are placed. Items are then placed within them. They're positioned and made in cool and interesting ways, right? People are making art. This is the creative process in Star Wars Galaxies where people are designing houses, or at least, how items are placed within them. And there's a great degree of flexibility for Star Wars Galaxies, too. It's three-dimensional. You can go up, down, left, right. You can rotate. You can spin. And you can make things upside down. You can craft really intricate, interesting pieces of art in the world, all based and founded upon cities and structures, right? So in modern games, I think of gems like Minecraft or Ark, and I can't help but think of the ways in which Star Wars Galaxies made an influence on that design because of how good it is. Because of how much power it gives to the players, the tools that then they create these beautiful things, right? I mean, if you look at Minecraft, there's nothing in there of interest to start until the players create it. It's a very similar concept in Star Wars Galaxies, I think. The landscape is vast. There's plenty of spaces for player cities to realize themselves in various different visions and forms. I've seen casinos, military cities, beachfront hotels, zoos, museums, all kinds of wonders. And I often imagine, what if we gave players even more tools to go even further, right? So, that's the true end game. It's social play. Whether you're a band leader, hospital, doctor, group member, citizen, mayor, faction general, guild leader, right? Star Wars Galaxies truly shines when it sings true to the original vision of social interaction. In a day and age when social interaction is going through various challenges, it's no surprise to me to see a resurgence in a social community game like Star Wars Galaxies. All of my fondest memories in Star Wars Galaxies involved other players and forging friendships, and so I really think that's where the landing space is for the end game of Star Wars Galaxies, and that informs what we're doing. So we have to ask, okay, so we're returning to the question. How does one play Star Wars Galaxies? Or more specifically for us now, how does one play Star Wars Galaxies Scorekeeper? How do we want them to play it? How do we design it to be played? Well, for me, it seems that the end game is the primary game. So, consider that a large portion of our players have likely already gone through the painful stages of early and mid-leveling. And I don't really see them having fun on the second, third, or perhaps even fourth go around, right? Instead, I see them rushing straight to the end game. That's what everybody does in Star Wars Galaxies emulators. Is they know what to do. They say, I need to be a master rifleman before I can actually even play the game, right? So I'm going to go master rifleman. So I say, let's help them. Basically we should update the early and mid game to be easier. And have improved quality of life, and we should assist players with getting to that end game faster, especially if we think it's more fun and we're going to spend more development time on that end game. Why waste resources on what's not going to be a fun part of the game? So here's what I think that end game would look like for all of these types. So, for the mercenary, I really want them to start the game, jump right into the war and PvP. They can start upskilling with their squad on day one. How cool would it be if they could jump in, make an impact, join the gang, go fight for the rebellion or fight for the empire or just go start bounty hunting, and they can start realizing and actualizing their skills immediately. I don't really see a problem with that. I think that's a great way to immediately engage that player and have fun, instead of gatekeeping them and saying, well, you can't actually PvP for another couple months because there's such a ladder that you have to climb to get there. For the treasure hunter, right? Kind of same deal. Start the game, go start exploring. Simple. We should get rid of all the gatekeeping that we possibly can. When I think of the idea of, well, you can't quite get into this zone until you do all XYZ pre-quests. Silly. It's nonsense. I think you get rid of all of that. You make it so that way you can just jump right into meaningful content. Imagine joining as a treasure hunter, and maybe you're a group, focused play. You say, I really want to play a Tusken, or I'm really interested in Tusken stuff. Book of Boba Fett came out, and that's the mood I'm in right now. I want to go get Tusken stuff. And so why don't we say to that player, go for it, right? You log right in, and then you are an adequate level where maybe you can join a group of friends immediately, and you can go raid Fort Tusken and maybe go do the Tusken heroic. I think if we can design and update the game to a point to where that's feasible, I think you have a fun game. Okay, for the entrepreneur, honestly, nothing really changes here. I think you already can jump into the game, start crafting, harvesting, trading, and having fun. I hate to say it, but I think SOE actually they had it right on this one. The idea that you could just jump in and start crafting, there's no special quests you have to do. It's all contained within your draft schematics that you learn as you level your profession. It's perfect. It is honestly perfect. It is a player-driven economy by the players, for the players. I really think the only thing that needs to happen is just tweaks that fix broken things, or make items that maybe were not viable again. Small tweaks, honestly. Nothing really needs to change for the entrepreneur experience. I think it's near perfect. Which leads us now to the fourth and final mode, and how do we want that to look in Star Wars Galaxies Scorekeeper, and that's the citizen endgame. And I think this is really important. So I think you start the game and you find a city. Now, maybe you don't. Maybe you're a solo player, in which case this is juxtaposed to, I think, camping and rangering, and I think that's part of this. I think that's part of what it means to be a citizen. To be a wanderer. In some ways that relates to your citizenship, and that's a part of what this looks like. But ultimately you're going to eventually find a city, and I think this is where we as a development team need to make the most tweaks to kind of change and reorder incentives, risk, and reward. I think that this includes the entertainer experience, the politician experience, and I firmly believe that this endgame is quintessentially Star Wars Galaxies. And if we can ramp up the level of fun via player control or impact with player cities, I think that this is quite possibly the most impacting endgame to redesign and improve upon. And I think it's the most fun. I think when you look at being a citizen in the Star Wars Galaxies, it's when all the pieces come together. You are supporting or influencing the war in such a way that it has an impact on your soldiers and your mercenaries, and they fight for something that should impact your city, and it does in current game. It changes the troopers and it makes travel easier or harder, but I think we can ramp that up and really make that fun, or more fun, because it's already pretty good. But I think also they interface with the treasure hunters and the entrepreneurs. Cities, that's where you house vendors. That's where you house malls. And that's usually where people have their houses, where they bring back their loot, whether individually or collectively, and they put it on display and form it into art. And so I think that if we can maximize this element of the game, we create a stronger end game that integrates all these parts together. Well, that's all for now. So thanks for listening to this dev diary, and I look forward to getting some feedback and for the glory of the Scorekeeper.